This podcast, bussin'.
Welcome to this.podcast. I'm your friendly host, Jay. Here we go. Cause I don't want. We got these drops when I go. This is how we do our zingers, man. And then we got Co.
Man, what we talking about?
And Uncle Damo is out.
Oh, my name is Uncle Damo.
You can catch us on all streaming platforms. Apple, Spotify will meet you where you're at. And we also got video on YouTube. Shout out to the incredible Lawrence and Larimer for providing the space. You could catch them at 3225 East Colfax Avenue, or you can catch them online at lawrenceandlarimer.com. You know, JC was supposed to have fries for everybody, man. He was going to have this big, elaborate kind of party, and he's doing this new thing called Hello Friday, because it is Friday, so he was supposed to have fries for us, man. He's trying to feed us.
So he cuts us short.
He cuts us short, man. We don't have our speaker.
Yeah.
We don't have no food. What's up with that?
Man.
But he does provide the space, man. So shout out to JC.
Yeah, man. Be humble.
Yes, we are very lucky.
We are very humble. We are very lucky to have JC.
Absolutely. Shout out to you, JC. We love you.
Maybe talking about how you skimping on fries, brother.
All right, without further ado, let's get into our guest, man. We are very excited to have this person on the pod. This is going to be the first person we've had from the mountains on the pod.
Man.
Representing Vail. He's an American educator and a politician who served as the Colorado State Senate from District 33rd, right?
You bet. Northeast Denver.
In the house. Come on, what are we talking about?
This
Park Hill,
podcast,
building.
bussin'.
That was from 2009 to 2017, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and now he's a Denver Mayoral candidate. Let's give a round of applause for Mike Johnston. Yeah. You hear the guy that goes, woo! He's excited you're here. Well, I want to start off because your face has been out there a lot, but you and I have kind of crossed paths and you don't know it. So I know you heard of the Holly doc that's out. And while Terrence was doing the courts, we were out there also, myself and a friend of mine, Herman White.
Yeah,
and we were out there helping build the courts out there, and you were out there helping and shaking hands and everything and doing the good deed. So we've rubbed elbows, man, and met in the past, but just really didn't know it.
I'm so glad to cross paths again. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man.
Did he have a camo shirt on?
I don't think he had the camo
I did not.
shirt.
Terrence was rocking the camo. I don't think I had the camo at that stage. Did a lot of painting of camo, but I don't think I was rocking it.
I think you were smart in that aspect because I was hot. I was hot that day.
Hey, man, but the camo didn't age well, man.
It didn't. I looked kind of corny. Yeah, it didn't look right, but it was for a good cause. It was for the kids, man.
Great cause.
Absolutely. So,
man, shout out to Terrence, man.
Shout out to Terrence, man. Definitely done a lot in the community.
Yes.
And speaking of that, so you had an office in Northeast Park Hill near the Holly.
Yeah.
And you were, so tell us, how did that come to be?
Yeah. Yeah, I had an office there for 10 years, so I was there for a long, long time. And it was, at that point, I had just been elected to the state senate. I was a school principal at that point. I'd been working for Obama for a while when he ran for president, and after he won, I had offered to go work for the president in D.C. and instead I chose to run for the state senate and represent Northeast Denver. And when I got elected, I thought kind of most important thing is going to be how are we going to keep our ears close to the ground in the neighborhood? How are we going to be able to make sure people can find us, can talk to us, can have their concerns heard? And how are you going to go to the parts of the community that feel like they don't have a voice? And at that point, the Holly, if you remember, right?
Absolutely.
It had been burned to the ground. At that point, it just had the giant chain link fence around a big pit of asbestos there.
Definitely.
And so we wanted to try to open an office in the Holly. And so went there and talked to Sister Carmel Rouse, who runs Union Baptist, and they owned that building.
Yep.
And so we opened our community office there, and we'd just gotten started. And I'd met Terrence before. I'd met Michelle Wheeler, some other community activists. Linda Lee, who's a longtime friend, one of my best friends, is a godmother of our kids. She had connected us to some people there, and so we opened the office. Then I reached out to Terrence because he was running Prodigal Son at that point, but didn't have an office space. Yeah. And so I said, hey, man, why don't you come share an office with us? So we shared that office for, 5 or 6 years. And got a chance to do a lot of things. That was when obviously the Boys and Girls Club got built then.
Yep.
What's now the Center for African American Health got built then. It was a school previously called Roots.
Yeah.
And so
Then the library came not too long
was
after
there,
that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So a lot of really great developments in the neighborhood. And, you know, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. There were still challenges, but a lot of really good community leaders who wanted to, you know, Jerry Grimes built the Hope
No,
Center there next
absolutely.
door. Just a lot of elders were pushing really big ideas there. And so it was a powerful time to be there. And it meant people could walk in any day and say, hey, here's what I'm worried about. Here's what's not working for me. Here's what the city or the state's not doing to help us.
So you were
not
very
alone.
intentional about being in those places so that you could hear their voices, right?
That was the whole idea. You know?
So definitely a servant of the people.
Yeah.
I want to know what got you into that realm of wanting to help people out, be a politician, etc.
Hey,
Education.
Mike,
all of that.
just real quick, Killer, can we table that? I just had one question
Yeah.
before we transition. Did you spend any time in the Horizon?
I did.
Let's talk about it.
I had a birthday party one night of mine in the Horizon.
Really?
Nice, man.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Mike's birthday at the Horizon. Let's talk about it.
There were definitely dollar bills involved. It was a dance party. It was good fun, man. But yeah, the Horizon was always popping on Friday night or Saturday night. So you were when the workday ended, it was picking up early.
Happy hour, you were going over to Horizon, huh?
Yeah,
And birthday.
That's
what's up.
It was I can't remember how I got up there on my birthday, but someone invited me and we ended up there and it was good fun. So yeah, we had a couple nights at the Horizon.
You don't you don't know how many stripes you just earned coming from Vail, having your birthday at the Horizon. You just don't know.
Fun. It was good.
This podcast, bussin'.
All right. Let's move on.
Was Ned's open at that time too?
Yeah, yes.
Was Ned's?
Yes.
So you would get snacks from Ned's
Yeah,
too?
Ned, the convenience store.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, ice cream sandwiches, man. That was it's like
That
on
was
a
the
long
deal.
day. You go for ice cream sandwiches.
Was Chow's open too?
No.
Chow's was closed down.
Mississippi Boy, that was new.
Yeah.
There you go.
That was a
Shout
new
out to
arrival.
Mississippi Boy. They got
This
great food down
podcast,
there,
bussin'.
man. That was a
Mike
good question, man.
was outside.
He was.
Which is actually a funny segue to your question about how I got started, because my first job ever was in Mississippi. My first job ever was teaching in high school in
Really?
Greenville, Mississippi. Yeah,
How
so
did you make your way down there?
I had grown up, even in the mountains, I'd grown up as someone that was just always kind of interested and curious about the history of civil rights in this country. So
Got it.
King had been my hero since I was as big as I could remember. My mom tells stories about how I used to try to memorize King speeches on my fireplace when I was a kid. And so I'd always wanted to go to Mississippi. It's kind of, you learn so much about the history of Medgar Evers and the Poor People's March and Emmett Till and all the stories of Mississippi. And I just felt like I wanted to know, how much had changed and how much had stayed the same in those 50 years. And so I took a job there teaching high school English in Greenville, Mississippi. And loved it. Directed a couple school plays, coached a couple sports, and then I decided I wanted to be a school principal because I love being a teacher, but felt like there was only so much. I had been really great relationships with the kids, and you get those kids connected to you in your 1 hour of the day that you got them, and then they would drift back out into a high school of 2,000 kids, and you could never find them again. And I had this idea of I wanted to run a school where every teacher knew every kid, and you had those kind of relationships you could carry on for years.
Absolutely.
And so I came back home to Colorado with a dream of starting that school. And I got to tell you, I'd come home from Mississippi, and people would say, "Man, what's it like to teach in Mississippi?
Absolutely.
It's so backwards there. It must be so racist. What's it like in Mississippi?" And then you look at the data, and at that point, you look at what state had the worst college completion gap in America, and it's not Mississippi, it's not Tennessee, it's not Alabama, it's Colorado.
Wow.
Colorado is the single largest race gap for college completion of any state in the country.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, we got work to do in my own home state. Don't need to be down in Mississippi telling folks what they can work on. We got work to do here. And so I came home and was a school principal. I ran a couple of high schools like Courtney was talking about, but the one I took over was in Thornton, where we finally delivered that vision of building a small high school, about 100 kids per grade.
Definitely.
And we set it up where you have a team of 4 or 5 teachers that would loop with those kids. So they take 100 ninth graders, and you work with those same 100 kids for all of 9th grade and all of 10th grade. So you get much deeper connections between kids and adults. We were able to turn around a school that had a 50% dropout rate into what became the first public high school in Colorado history, where 100% of our seniors all graduated, and 100% of those seniors all got admitted to 4-year colleges.
That is awesome.
This podcast, bussin'.
So, Mike, this message just came from the crowd, the audience. And, the cities across the country, from St. Louis to Evanston, Boston, are studying the history of racial injustice in order to put forward recommendations for Black residents. While these recommendations sometimes include cash payments, health, housing, and other policy areas, as mayor, would you support Racial Justice Research Project to launch similar efforts for Black Denverites?
Yes, I would. And actually, I've spent the last 3 years working on a version of this project that I'm really proud of, which is, after George Floyd's murder, at that point, I was running a foundation here in town. And we were looking at, what fundamentally can we do to make an impact on inequality in the city? And it was literally, if you've read Nicole Hannah-Jones's piece, What Is Owed, it was one of the outtakes of 1619 that was in the New York Times.
Right.
And in that, she talks about the inequalities, and she says, yeah, income inequalities are big, but the biggest gaps by far are wealth gaps. And if you look at particularly between families with young kids, they're the largest. Black families with young kids have about $1,500 or $2,000 of wealth built. White families with young kids have almost 100 times that built. And the biggest divider is access to home ownership. And so what we found, we started digging into it, is you got folks, not surprisingly, who got a good job, got the income, got credit, but go to a bank and don't ever get a mortgage. And of the folks that were mortgage eligible, Black folks who were mortgage eligible in Colorado, 93% of them would walk into a bank and never get a loan. And the reason why was they didn't have the down payment to be able to get into a home.
Absolutely.
And so we started to look at, all right, if we could fundamentally change that trajectory, you could dramatically close the wealth gap in the state. And you look at, it shouldn't surprise us that when you spend 400 years denying families systematically the ability to build wealth or to pass it on, that when the way you get a house is to have wealth accumulated, folks don't have that. And so we launched a fund called the Dearfield Fund, which was focused on getting Black and African American families access to home ownership as a way to close the wealth gap. And so it was the first race-based fund of its sort. We had a hard time finding a bank that would carry it because I didn't want to take a race-based fund. We did find one. We opened it, and now we've raised the first $12 million to launch this fund. Served the first 100 or more families who've now been able to get about $50,000 of down payment assistance. You buy the home. You don't pay a note on it. You keep that as long as you want to. Whenever you sell the home or refinance it, you just pay it forward to the next family. And the idea for us was, this country has bet on white families for centuries, and when they didn't always have the credit or the income to earn it.
Right.
And that bet has turned out really well. We've systematically not bet over and over and over again on Black families, and it's time to reverse that course. So for me, we started this. It's been very successful. I would want to, as mayor, take it citywide to say we could be able to actually, the amazing thing is, you take a wealth gap that's 400 years in the making. You build that fund to $150 million, you can make Denver the first city in America to actually close the entire Black-white wealth gap by giving every family that's ready for one access to a home. That'd be a game changer.
Yes.
If you could do it in Denver, then you should go to Chicago's and Detroit's and Birmingham's and Atlanta's and say, y'all got to do the same thing. But I think Denver ought to be the one to lead on this.
That's awesome.
That's dope, man. You're good.
This
You're good, because I was going to bring that up during this pod. And so I guess my question is, when it comes to that, where does the funding come from? Can you explain that to the listeners, where you get that funding?
So when we started this, I was running a foundation. So we started that with raising money from foundations, from philanthropy. And it's like a revolving loan fund. So the idea is you put all that money into the fund, and then the fund recycles. One family uses it. They use it for 5, 7, 10 years. They pay it back, and you can pay it forward to the next family. We started it with foundation dollars because we didn't want to wait for public dollars, or we didn't want to wait for other people to jump in. Once we started it and it's been successful, now we want to grow it with public dollars. Now we want to take taxpayer dollars, corporate dollars, anybody that wants to be able to be a part of the solution. You can put it money that you know is going to make a dramatic impact on people getting access to wealth building. Because if you get into a home in Denver, you can easily grow $150,000 of wealth in 5, 10 years right now. So that's the most powerful way to build wealth. And so we started with philanthropic dollars, but now we passed a ballot measure last year called Proposition 123. That was for housing. And a big one thing people didn't notice about that is a big part of that is dollars that will go into down payment assistance to expand a program exactly like Dearfield. So you could have more and more families that would be eligible. And then as mayor, I'd want to expand city dollars directly that you could put into this and call on more foundation and corporate partners to add to it so you can get to that gold standard of $150, $200 million in the fund, and then every family in the city that needed it could get access to down payment assistance.
Nice. I was going to say, man, so I've been reading on your website. I think what I enjoy about how you're going about your campaign and the things that you're doing. You talk about what you want to do, the problems you want to solve, and then you got a plan behind it.
Yes.
You know, it does. I don't know. It's hard, you know, and I'm not running for mayor, so you know the things that will be on your plate difficult. So I do appreciate that you have, hey, this is how I'm going to raise money in order to pay for these things. Since we're talking about housing, there is the 2.0 ballot that's out there, and could you give our listeners some background on what that is exactly?
You bet. And I know there are friends of mine that have strongly held opinions on both sides of this one, so I'll try to give the most neutral overview. What it is there's the Park Hill Golf Course, which everybody knows and remembers. That Park Hill Golf Course has an easement on it. The easement says this may only be used as a golf course, and so it was owned for a while by the Clayton Early Learning Center. You know that preschool there. So they owned it. They then sold that. They sold that property to a developer. And so the developer wants to develop on this site. And so what they've proposed is saying, what we'll do is the 150 acres. We'll give 100 acres back to the city. That would become a 100-acre park. On those other 50 acres, we would build about 600 permanently affordable housing units. Also put a grocery store there. You know, I'll tell you, when I was in North Park Hill for 10 years, the two biggest things you hear is it's the biggest food desert in the metro area.
Definitely.
And it is also, the largest plurality black community left in the city and county of Denver, right? In which people are being pushed out at a very, very rapid rate. So the biggest concerns are, can people still afford to live in this neighborhood? And can you get access to healthy food? We ate a lot at the convenience store. That's actually not the best place to feed
No, absolutely.
Honey buns.
So that's right. That's
Honey
right.
buns.
So what the vote does is it says if the voters choose to lift the easement, then this organization could develop those housing units, the grocery store, and the park. I think there are some people who would say, I don't want the development, I just want the park. And those are the people that are voting no. I think the misunderstanding is if you vote no, you don't get a park. If you vote no, by law, you have to turn it back into an 18-hole golf course.
Right,
and
exactly.
So I think that's for me, when I read the details of the contract and the easement, I said, it seems like it's a debate between affordable housing and a park, but it's actually not. It's a debate between affordable housing, a park, and a grocery store, or an 18-hole golf course.
Yes, absolutely.
And so for me on that, I'm going to vote yes, because I'd rather have the grocery store, the affordable units, and the park. Of course, I'll respect whatever the voters decide. If the voters vote no, then we can try to go back and start over. But I think that's why on the balance, I'm voting yes.
This podcast, bussin'.
And it is a very hot button topic. You know, being that born and raised in Park Hill, for me, I never benefited from a golf course.
No,
especially
absolutely.
you got another one 5 blocks away. Right?
Yeah,
City Park
like,
golf course is about 5 blocks away.
Yeah, like that golf course never did anything for me or any of my friends or any. Like I didn't have a family member who was a member at that golf course. Yeah. It was kind of like you just drove by.
Yeah, that's true.
You just drove by like, oh, okay.
And you know, I got to say, we a lot of things I was proud of. We tried for 10 years to get a grocery store in North Park Hill and failed. You know, we couldn't ever get it done, and the reason why was they wouldn't put it on MLK. They wouldn't put it in the Holly because there's not enough traffic.
Right.
Yeah.
They said to us the only place you can put a grocery store in this neighborhood is on Colorado Boulevard. Because you got to have enough traffic to come by and to be able to make it work. And so that spot is, I think, really the only place we're going to be able to get one done. And the other thing is what you want to do on housing is, you know, you got that great light rail stop there now. Yep. And so if you're going to build housing, you want folks to be able to get to public transit and get there easily. And so if you go east now to like Central Park Boulevard, by the next light rail stop, there's probably 2,000 units of apartments going up right down on that. And that's what you want to do. If you got a light rail stop right there, you want to build density. So I think it is the right place and the right option, but there are definitely, this is like the first thing they'll start a fight in any meet and greet in Denver. As you bring up this topic, folks get heated. So it's, but I think some of it I do think is misperception because it's a very complicated process, but I think it's, in the end, I'd rather see the housing than not.
Yeah. No, I agree because I'm glad you explained it like that because a lot of people think it's either or. Yeah. And 100 acres of land for a park is a pretty big park.
It's bigger than Central Park. It'd be like the third or fourth biggest park in the city. And I think that's a big plus. We also, you probably know from Herman, right? I mean, they also have a big idea to build a kind of world-class sports complex there. Yes. So you could have the kind of venue that attracts the out-of-state competitors and tournaments and games and allow some of these more competitive youth teams to be able to train and practice there. I know you got some Pirates history, I think, right? So I think that idea too, as making Park Hill really a destination spot for people around the state and the region, I think is exciting.
And it all ties in with affordable housing for Black and Brown.
That's right.
And then the only thing I'll say is that when those business opportunities come in, I think those should be, to the best of the ability, reserved for Black and Brown also. Because when it comes to gentrification, it seems like a lot of the businesses, new development goes to white and non-minority. So if we could get those things to stay with Black and Brown, I think that would be awesome.
I totally agree. And especially think that is the risk, because if you talk about the fastest way to gentrify a neighborhood is normally to build a park, right? You build a park,
absolutely.
and then you got $1 million homes all around it. You look at Platt Park, you look at Central Park, any of those places, right? So the idea of saying, if we're going to build a park, you're going to start by making sure every one of the homes around them, you got affordability right on that park, because otherwise those families would want to stay or move there, would never get access
Definitely
to live around that park. So I think that's really critical. I'm excited to talk. I mean, one of the things you might have read about on my website is, I think when it comes to small business cultivation, one of the things I think the city has gotten wrong is we have not bet on our entrepreneurs of color, and we have not bet on small businesses and their growth here. Like, I think that what we found, the same thing in home ownership, is we know access to capital is the single biggest problem for small businesses, particularly minority-led small businesses. Yep. And we know disproportionately folks are going out to venture investors or to banks and getting rejected. Like, the last thing you ought to do is then come to your city and get rejected again. You know? And so for me, when I ran a venture fund at this foundation, we disproportionately invested in both Black-led funds and Black-led businesses, because the idea is you ought to be able to take your dollars and take higher risk to actually support mission-aligned development.
Absolutely.
And the city should do the same thing. I'd much rather have us be a city where we bet on 20 entrepreneurs and get one Lawrence and Larimer than saying, oh, you know what? Like, you talk to Fatima Dickerson, right, about Welton Street Cafe. She'll say, oldest Black-owned business in Denver. She'll say she's been waiting 18 months, for a $50,000 bridge loan to be able to get Welton Street Cafe back open.
Which is ridiculous.
That's inexcusable.
Absolutely.
I'd rather bet on 10 of those and have 9 of them fail, but say we bet on these folks. We gave them dollars early when they needed it, and they couldn't get it from traditional banks. And the city should be the convener to bring the rest of those investors in and say, hey, we're with her. You should be with her too.
Absolutely.
Bring in the private sectors, bring in the banks.
And to support those Black businesses that were displaced.
Yes.
For example, my father owned a tire shop for years on the Dahlia. He was literally the last person to sell. It was tumbleweeds out of the Dahlia. And, for some reason, my dad's older. He was just like, yo, I'm not selling. I don't care what anybody else around me is doing. I'm not selling.
Right.
Until they came to him and said, look, if you don't sell it, we're going to condemn it. And my father at the time didn't have the money to fight it or because, I didn't know the Dahlia was basically built on top of a landfill. So it was a whole bunch of just crap up underneath there. And it was like, yo, either you clean this up or we condemn it and you take it and you lose it anyway. So he ended up having to sell his place. And, it positioned him pretty good, you know what I mean, for him, but it wasn't what he wanted to do. You know what I mean? I think he took pride in being an entrepreneur, especially in the Park Hill neighborhood. My dad said, you know what, for one thing, there always has to be a Black presence in Park Hill. So that's why he would never sell his houses. He would never sell that tire shop. And now it's not there. And it's like, I look at it and it's like, now for me, so the big thing is like, what are we going to do as a city to provide opportunity for some of these business owners that were displaced that can come back and kind of restart?
And I think there's a huge opportunity now when we have a lot of open commercial space downtown. We got a lot of buildings that are empty. We got buildings that are underutilized. That's a perfect chance to say, all right, we want to bring you back. We want to give you cheaper rent. We want to give you access to good real estate. We want to help finance you because the city needs you to recover. We want to see you succeed. And those are the kind of businesses that make people want to come to Denver, right? Or love being in Denver, is the places like this that you can only find in Denver, right? You don't need another chain store. You do need something you can say, oh man, this is built by a local community leader, a local leader of color, as a vision for what their neighborhood needs. That's what makes Denver a place people want to stay.
Definitely. Well, let's get into the mayoral debate recently. It seemed like it was the Mike show for a good 20 minutes. Because we do have, I think, 17 candidates. So how does that happen? Is it anybody can run for be mayor?
Yes. You can usually, the requirement is you basically got to get 300 signatures to be able to get on the ballot. And a lot of people can do that. The fun part has been it's a great, diverse, fascinating group of leaders with different histories. Yeah. The hard part is if you're a voter, it's hard to listen through 17 people, in a 2-hour debate. And it's funny, we've had debates where you'll get an opening statement, you'll answer one question, and you'll get a closing statement. And that was the whole thing.
No, absolutely.
You might speak for 2 minutes in a 2-hour debate.
So what was...
Combine, man.
That's what it is,
it's
man.
The combine.
Yeah, it's all about the lead horse.
You got one shot at this 40.
That's right. That's right. And not a lot of people running fast 40s in this race.
And it definitely felt like you were the lead horse because when you were able to ask other candidates your question, I felt like you got all of them except for like maybe 3 people, and it was just...
I did get a whole lot of questions. The Kyle Clark joked. He was like, Mike, do you want to ask yourself a question?
yeah, I saw that.
I was like, no, it's all right. I'll pass.
But what was interesting about that, and we need to talk about it, is the homelessness crisis. And giving your plan, again, I like that you have a plan, and you're trying to figure out how to pay for it. A lot of the candidates say you were overambitious, and it's something that would not work. I do counter to that to say, well, I would rather have a candidate that wants to solve it in the first term, go for that ambition. What do you say to the naysayers as far as when it comes to your plan for homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, the first competitive part of me says, people have been saying it couldn't be done for a long time, but a lot of things I worked on, whether it was getting all your kids into college or whether it was passing the first statewide ballot measure on affordable housing, whether it was launching the Dearfield Fund, like all things people said couldn't be done. So I like that challenge.
This podcast, bussin'.
But I do also think your point is, for me, it matters because it's grounded in what we've proved already works. It's not like an idea on a whiteboard, So for me, I've traveled the country. I've looked at cities that are doing the best on this, cities that are doing the worst. I've talked to all the providers around Denver to see what we know is working, and there is actual real proof points of how this gets done. So it's not a dream for me. It's actually a reality. It's just how hard you're going to work to deliver it. And for me, what I've learned is like all well intended, but we've seen the mistakes we've made and what hasn't worked, and we've seen what does work. And the data is clear that this works as a strategy. For those folks that didn't watch the debate, the big idea I've put out there is the way you help. There are about 1,400 people right now who are living on the streets on any given night in Denver. And that's a heartbreaking number, but it's a solvable number. Like, that's not an impossible number of people. And so what I proposed is building these micro communities where you take a half-acre lot that's vacant somewhere in the city that Denver owns. We own plenty of them. And you put 40 or 50 tiny homes on that lot. Each one of those tiny homes has got their own key, their own door. You got your own safe, dignified, stable place you can put your stuff. And then on those communities, you bring in all the wraparound services folks need. You got job training, you got mental health support, you got addiction treatment, you got long-term housing navigators. You got all those services. And most importantly, you do it in a way that actually respects the way people build community when they're unhoused. I think that this is what I learned from Houston. The reason Houston's been so successful is they don't go into an encampment with 10 people and say, hey, I got a unit for one of you. Why don't you come 8 miles across town and we'll hook you up?
Right. You
actually, when you open a micro community, the reason why you do it with 40 units at once is you can go to 3 blocks of people living in encampments at Union Station, and you can move that entire community as a community to a new place that is dignified, safe, stable. It's got showers, it's got kitchens, it's got heat. And then people are dramatically more successful. And so we did this in a partnership with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And the first myth people have is, folks don't want this kind of housing. They like being homeless. Right. And when we had 300 units and reached out to people, within the first week or two, we had 850 people who wanted to take them. It's like massive demand. But then more importantly, when you move those 300 people into units like this, a year later, 86% of them are still housed successfully. It's like that's a massive number at 86%.
That is.
Yes. So to say we got data that shows we can get 86% of people with this intervention right now off the street into housing back on their feet, that's a massive change. Definitely. And then the 14% that don't succeed there, that's kind of like your response to intervention, right? Like when you look at what are those, they then need more supports and more services, but that's much easier to wrap those services around 100 people than it is around 1,400.
Absolutely.
And so that's what gives me a lot of, not just hope, but really facts that like we know this can be accomplished. But I do think it does require a mayor to have the big vision to say, here's what we're doing. And here's what we're doing as a city. And we're all a part of this, and we all got a role in it. And so here's what we're going to do. Here's what mental health's going to do. Here's what zoning's going to do. Here's what law enforcement's going to do. And here's how we all work on it together. Because I think people want to be called to something bigger than themselves. And this is that big thing. If we can be the first big American city that solves this problem, that'd be something to hold our heads high about, right? Like that'd be something we could look back 50 years from now and say, oh man, Denver were the first ones to figure this out.
Absolutely.
How'd they do it? And I think people here are ready to be called to something big.
That's dope. No, I think, being mayor is hard, and it's a boring job.
Because
it's got to be boring.
Yeah,
you know.
It's
well. What I mean by boring is that a lot of politicians want the glitz and glamour.
Yeah,
you know, the debates and running and campaigning. Yeah, that's exciting. But once you're mayor, it's very, blue collar. Hard work. It's hard work. I mean,
it's for me.
Like
it's of all the things I've done, I think it's the most similar to running a school, where it's like every day
absolutely.
you get up, you grind it out. The way we had success was every single kid in our school, we knew every day where they were and how they were doing. We had a board we built. We called it the Climb to College, and every single kid had their own 3x5 card where they put their name and they decorated however they wanted. And every week we would track the progress of every single kid. So like, have you completed all your credits? Have you filled out your financial aid form?
Right.
Have you applied to 3 colleges?
Yeah.
Have you done your interview yet? And then if there's 15 kids that still haven't completed their credits, it's not like it's going to be a surprise in May when you're like, oh wait, you're not graduating?
Right.
We know you don't have credits in October. So what's the plan? And it's the same way. It's all right. We got 1,400 people that are unhoused every day. What's the count? How many of them we got into housing? Yeah. How many have we not? What do they need that we don't have for them? Like it is that tenacity day to day to just be relentless about tracking it and delivering on it. But that part of the job I actually love.
So Mike, in the state of the city, I need you to have your sleeves rolled up, man.
I'm going to be ready.
Is that like just let me, this is totally, is the sleeves rolled up just the politician uniform? Like, I got to have my sleeves rolled up. Is that just
like
standard, man?
Table stakes.
Yeah. It's just like, I got to have the sleeves rolled up.
No, I don't know.
Barack had the sleeves rolled up.
It was Barack. Barack made it cool.
The blue shirt.
Yeah, the blue shirt, sleeves rolled up. I'm ready for business.
Barack also famously never changed the outfits, right? He's like, he had 4 outfits, and that was it. Because he's like, you know what? That's one decision I don't have to make every morning. I'm not going to be like, oh, man, does this shirt match? Like, does it match these pants?
Yeah,
minimalist.
Absolutely.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to that stage yet, but, that's goals. Goals is to get to just 4 outfits and wear them every day.
Man, so how does the Vail community, feel about you bringing your talents to Denver?
South Beach?
Yeah. You bring your talents to Denver, man.
I don't know. I hope they're proud. I don't think they're too salty.
Okay.
I always knew I wanted to live in a city. I think if my wife used to live in Atlanta, so we lived there for a while, and so I think I knew we both wanted to be in cities, and she was in social work then, and I was a school principal, and so when you're working with kids and families, you'd like to be in one place for a long time, because you get to see them grow up, and you get to see their kids get born, and so we knew we wanted to settle someplace we'd stay for a long time, and that was going to always be a big city.
Yeah, because because I would be kind of salty, man. If I was a Vail resident, I'm like,
why?
He's one of ours.
You want him to stay up there?
And he wants to go down to the big city and, change things down there.
Well, he's definitely making change. And, so for this candidacy, it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. I think you're doing well as far as if we were to do a poll. I haven't seen him. But I think he would definitely be the lead horse. Real quick, shifting gears, and I think it's responsible on our platform to talk about this. Unfortunately, we had the city of Denver has experienced a tragic incident here recently with the shooting at a public school due to gun violence. The good news is that the victims that were injured are doing better, but I want to get your take on just gun violence and school safety.
Yeah.
And how can we prevent incidents like this happening within our public school system?
Yeah, this is a hard one. This is a whole nother Oprah. It's a full hour, but I think I've been working on this for a long time, both as a school principal and then as a legislator. I did a lot of work on gun safety. I was in the Senate after the Aurora Theater shooting happened, and I feel like sadly, each time there's one of these, we learn about a new problem that we got to solve, and you got to try to keep getting smarter and better. For us then, it was, he brought a 100-round magazine into that theater that night, which is why he shot, something like 100 people.
Yeah.
And so we then took the action to be the first state to ban high-capacity magazines, so you can't bring 15, 30, 60, 100-round magazines into schools or churches or anyplace else. We also required universal background checks, so you can't just go buy a gun online and be able to get access to those. The state later added these red flag laws, which are really important, which says if there's someone that is a risk to themselves or a risk to others, you can make sure they don't get access to guns. I think, and those have helped, but they're not enough. And so what we learned, I think, this week is we know a big part of this as for school communities are, yes, you got to have more prevention. You got to be able to help kids find their passions when they're young. So one of the things I've been working on with John Bailey and Herman and some others is this idea of helping every kid in the city get access to after school or summer school programming of their choice. If you want to join the Pirates, do that. If you want to join a ballet troupe, do that. If you want to be in science camp, do that. But help every kid, even the kid whose parents can't afford to pay for those kind of programs, get access to them so they find their passion and get connected to them. The other one Courtney and I were talking about is intervention. How do you, when you have a kid that has got into some trouble, I've run schools like this, and when you have that flag on a kid, you got to then wrap all the services and supports you got around the kid. This shooter at East, we knew, had a history. He'd had a history of making some bad choices, had a history of access to guns. When you know that, you got to have all the resources of a city coming around, and the firms of therapy and support and mental health resources, those all matter a ton. And then I think there are some more policy changes we can make. I would raise the level to purchase a gun from age 18 to 21. I would add waiting periods for gun purchases so you don't have crimes of passion. That's true both for things like domestic violence or school shootings. But the gun that this kid had was a ghost gun, which means he either 3D printed it himself or assembled it at home. This gets tougher and tougher. So this is where I think when you have a kid or a teacher that knows that there's something wrong, I think we got to expand these red flag laws. And Rhonda Fields, who you all probably know, is leading the effort on this right now at the state Senate, so that educators could also be the ones to say, hey, I'm worried about this kid, and you should make sure he doesn't have access to guns. Right now, educators can't do that. So even though the teachers knew that they had a reason to be afraid, they couldn't take common sense steps. So for me, that's one policy change I think that would be important to help. People asked about school resource officers. I know that the parents and the teachers and the school administrators have said they want those resource officers back. I think if they want them back, they should have the choice to do that. That's not the panacea. It's not going to solve it entirely, but I do think in a situation like this where you had a kid who was on probation and had history, I would have rather had a school resource officer being the one doing the search than an educator. And I'm glad those folks survived, but I would not, as a principal, ever wanted to put one of my own teachers or my own needs in the position to do that. Definitely. So I think those are, for me, this is a complicated issue, and we got to do everything all at once. But those are the things I think would matter the most right now.
That was dope.
This podcast.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and you definitely have more knowledge than I do when it comes to that, because we were talking behind the scenes as far as getting rid of SROs. Like, understand why it came to that point, but what's the plan B, right? It's like, how do we protect staff, kids? How do we have the safety in the schools? What is the backup to that? So,
and I think the key is you do want to, so when I was a school principal, we didn't have an SRO because we had a social worker instead. Some principals might make that decision, but if you're in a school where you've had 3 shootings in a year and you got kids and parents that are afraid, I think what you do then is you say, you got to be really clear, what is the role of this SRO? What does he do and what does he not do? Yeah. I don't want an SRO, ticketing kids because I got 2 girls fighting in the cafeteria at lunch. I don't need that. And you don't want that. You don't want over policing. You don't want over ticketing. But when you have a kid who's on a safety plan, who's had access to a weapon, and you got to worry about searching them every day, I do want an SRO doing that.
Absolutely. And not only that, though, you mentioned, like, especially for this size of school, and we're talking about East, it's a lot of kids, over 2,500 kids, and it's hard to police, manage those many kids, have those kind of personal relationships just because it's a lot. When you're at a smaller school and it's like, 40 to 80 kids, you have those personal relationships. It's easier to manage. But once it gets larger, like, you have to have the right protection or safety rules in place so that it can alleviate or try to prevent these occasions.
And I think that's a great point. I mean, that was, because I ran, as we were talking about before, I ran alternative schools that serve kids that had a lot of needs like that. And that's the right place for them. Because when you got 30 kids to look after and you got 10 adults, we're all focused on everything you need, and we can be there to provide any set of services. Much harder to ask a large comprehensive high school with 2,500 kids to do that. But I think we have, we talk about DC 21 and some of the other really great schools in Denver that really serve kids like that well. We want to serve them. We want to make sure they get a great education. We also didn't have to lose that young man. This is just my opinion.
And having SROs in schools is a good opportunity to kind of close that gap in terms of policing and community relations if you have the right officer in the school.
If you have the right one. Totally
And that needs to be the focus, is identifying the right SRO. Primarily for me, I would like to have someone that's from the community.
Absolutely.
I know my Bello had a great one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it was when they decided to take the SROs out of school, they were pissed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they really, those kids really had a relationship with that particular officer. I don't know his name, but
I just heard that today from a former Mont Bello student who said the same thing.
Yeah. And I graduated from Mont Bello, and what was cool was one of the coaches on the football team was a police officer. Yeah. And it makes them tangible, it makes them relatable, and it's you're not here to be a cop. Mm-hmm. Yes, when things happen, you got to address them, right? Yeah. But you're more of school staff. We want but there's nothing wrong with SROs going through some type of social emotional learning with the kids at the school.
Mm-hmm. Not at all.
To actually sit down and have these boy groups or girl groups with them, and so they can see the officers in a whole different light. And it's not that whole, the corny officer doing the electric slide.
No.
It's
real authentic.
But you're dating at 16. Okay, hey, these are the things you should be looking at. These are the things you should be looking at. These are the precautions you should be taking. Hey, if you're comfortable having conversations with me that have certain boundaries around them, hey, I'm here for you. You know what I mean? And those are the connections that last, right? It's not about, but sometimes it's just about that connection that changes kids' lives.
This podcast.
No, that's
bussin'.
Well said, Cole, because
said.
as you become responsible for other human beings, the most important thing is trust, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you just described of how do I build that trust? I got to get to know you on a personal level. I'm going to care personally, but I'll challenge directly.
Yes. Yeah.
A quote I read from a book, but
well said.
It's just, you need to do that, especially when you're in public service.
Exactly.
You got to be able to relate, right? Yep. And I definitely get that from you, Mike. You brought him out, man. We haven't had an audience like this in a while.
Yes.
We're gonna switch gears a little bit. We got this game called This or That. Okay, so
I'm ready.
Yes, with this or that, you can only choose one answer, but you can't give context.
Okay,
and you
great.
can pass if you want to. All right?
No punishment. There's no hey, Mike, we're gonna throw you a shot.
Yeah. We're gonna keep it clean. All right, so welcome to This or That. First question: red or blue?
Blue.
All right, Nirvana or Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Nirvana.
Tupac or Biggie?
Tupac.
Ski or snowboard?
Ski. We differ there.
Yes. I'm a boarder. NFL or NBA?
NFL.
All right. This is going to get tricky.
All right.
You ready? Pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie?
Ooh, that is hard. Pumpkin. I'm going to go pumpkin.
You're going to go pumpkin?
You can get it all seasons.
All right. Rihanna or Taylor Swift?
Rihanna.
John Elway or Joe Montana?
John Elway.
Yeah. All right. Next one. We've been asking this a lot. 500K or dinner with Jay-Z?
I got to say 500K.
Right answer. My man.
The other one. Do you have any, Co, before I go?
Let me think about it.
Okay.
I feel like I could pay for a table at one of his events for like $10K and still pocket $490K after that was over.
Oh, my list is short. I thought I had one more. Come on, Co, throw another one out there.
Nike Cortez or Hokanas?
What are those?
What's the shoes with the real thick sole?
I don't know. Doc Martens?
No. Nike Cortez. Let's make it easy. Or New Balance.
Nikes.
All day.
I got a son that's a real sneakerhead, so he'd be loving your shoes right now. I was just checking him out.
So
they fancy, ain't they?
Are you going with the AJ 1s or 3s?
I don't think I know that difference. I should know that. My son would be so embarrassed. The ones
Dad, you're tripping.
The ones are the originals, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably go ones. The red and blacks were the original ones, right?
Yep.
The Jordan ones with the red and black.
Yes.
Yeah, those
Absolutely.
are the iconic ones for me.
All right. Well, thanks for playing, Mike. Thanks for
This
there you go.
podcast, bussin'.
All right. What else is top of mind?
Man, your passion.
Yeah.
What what makes Mike passionate?
Yeah, for me it
Gets
is
you hyped, man.
Yeah.
What gets me hyped is like, those problems that seem unfixable that you can build amazing teams of people to actually fix. Like the idea that people have given in to things that just aren't fixable. Like, you know
Absolutely.
what? We're just going to have people be homeless forever. That's just what it is. When it's like, actually, no, it's not. Like, that's actually a fixable problem. And you can put people together. Like that feeling when you take on something that seems impossible and then you do it. Like for me, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Particularly when those things fundamentally change the lives of people that you know and love. You know, like for me, when it was all my kids that graduated from high school at my school up in Thornton, but they were undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
So at that point, if you were undocumented in Colorado, you couldn't go to college unless you paid out-of-state tuition.
Right.
And so we just, and, you know, I remember there was a time where there was like 3 successive valedictorians at Mount Bello High School that were all working at the same McDonald's.
Man.
Because they were all undocumented.
Yeah.
And every one of them couldn't go to college. And people just gave in to that being the case.
Man, it's funny. It's funny, man. I worked in the URM program at Denver Human Services.
Really?
Yes.
There you go. So
Yes.
for me, it was like, all right, we just got to change the law then. We got to figure out how you open the door to make sure every kid can go to college. And 2 years later, when I got to stand behind the governor and he signed that bill and got to drive back up to my old high school, and for the first time I knew my kids who were 7th graders were now seniors, and they could get up on stage, pick up a diploma, and say, I can go to college. Like,
Absolutely.
those are the moments that
Did you flex?
get me out of bed.
Did you flex? Did you walk in there with
I would have.
You know what?
a
What you
different strut,
what
man?
you don't want to know is I did used to have an agreement with my kids that if they had insanely good years, I would do the worm on stage. So that was, yeah, I haven't done that in a while, but that was bad decision central.
Got it. I was going to ask you to do the worm now. That'll help us go viral if you were able to do the worm.
Yo, we need one of the viral moments.
Yeah,
Man.
and then I'll lock up the candidacy. Yes, you got it. Well, thinking about the future, and if you become mayor, once, you know, everything settles, you know, you go through the, I don't know the term, but once you're
Inauguration.
Thank you. Inauguration. What is going to be the first thing on your plate that you want to go after?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. Day one for me would be homelessness. It'd be like, how do we start day one trying to get these folks access to services, getting them into housing, getting them stabilized, and getting back neighborhoods and communities where folks can use parks and sidewalks and public spaces without people having to live there. I think that's for all sides of the city. For those folks that are homeless, we owe them a better service than we're giving. And for people that have neighborhoods that or public spaces that they feel like don't belong to them anymore, we owe them back a city that belongs to all of us. I think that's true on both sides. Yeah. And I think if you get that right, it changes so much of the rest of the way the city feels, because then people, you know, you talk to, again, business owners who are struggling to try to get more foot traffic back in the door because they got encampments outside their front door, makes it tougher for them to do business. And so it's disserving all of us, including most of all the folks who are unhoused. And so for me, that's job one. And that's why I set the big vision about trying to take that on, is if I can get that one thing done in 4 years, that'd be amazing. And then you start to get the broader path of affordability for everybody, not just for those people that are unhoused, but for folks that are teachers and nurses and public servants in the city who can't afford to live in Denver anymore. You know, someone like Marcus Pope, if you know Marcus, who runs the Air Place on 28th. You know, and he'll say this. You know, he lives in Aurora now. You know, he runs a business in Denver, but can't afford to live in Denver. You know, and like that can't be the city.
House of hair. My son gets his hair cut there.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great spot.
No, a lot of our, that's what's strange, because a lot of our peers, I live in Park Hill and Co does too, but I was fortunate, you know, and if I were to buy my house today, like, there's no way I could live in Park Hill. But yeah, it's just strange how the history, how it's flipped, and we got to bring some of the old Park Hill back.
We do.
know.
And we got to make it possible for your
city,
kids to be able to buy a house in Park Hill 15 years from now.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And we got work to do to make that possible.
Well, I was reading the other day that the candidacy comes through Park Hill for mayor. Like that goes all the way back to the 60s.
It is true. Park Hill is like the most powerful neighborhood in the city.
Like every mayor has had to live in Park Hill at some point in order to win the candidacy.
The best I can do is my office in North Park. For 10 years. I don't know if that
Hey
counts.
man, you know what? You know what?
10
man?
years in the Holly.
When you said you had your birthday at the Horizon,
you won it.
You stamped.
Yeah.
You are stamped.
Linda was there that night, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I know Linda was Linden.
No, that's awesome.
At the Horizon.
Well, Mike, before we wrap things up, is there any message that you want to give to our listeners on why they should vote for Mike Johnston?
Thank you. I mean, I feel like one of the things people are looking for is kind of who's going to be able to fight to serve the whole city, you know? And I think Linda ran my first campaign when I ran for the state senate. And I think at that point, I was probably the first white guy to hold that seat in, 30 or 40 years at that time. There had been a long history of leaders that were black leaders from the community who had represented them. And when I won that race that night, there was someone asked a woman who was there, like, why did you vote for the white guy? And she said, he doesn't have to look like me for me to know he's going to fight for me. And I felt like
This podcast, bussin'.
I feel like I've tried to spend my career fighting for communities in the city who don't feel like their voices are being heard or don't feel like their needs are being served.
Right.
And I've tried to do that as a teacher, as a school principal, as a state senator, even in a foundation these last couple of years, working on things like the Dearfield Fund or like affordable housing. And I feel like this city needs a mayor who they believe is going to fight for every neighborhood and for every family. And that's what I've spent my life doing. That's what I ready to spend the next 8 years doing, because I feel like this could be a place that is not just a great city, but is a city that serves every family and every neighborhood, and where you feel like it's not a story of two Denvers. It's not a place where some neighborhoods are doing great and some are really struggling. We have a real risk of that happening if we're not really mindful about how we make sure we're lifting up the neighborhoods that have for too long been left behind, like North Park Hill.
Yep.
And so that's why I'm in this race, and that's what I hope we can do over the next decade.
That's awesome.
Man.
Do you got anything, Cole, before we wrap up?
Man, no. Nothing, yeah.
In the spirit of our other co-hosts, he always asks us at the end of the show, did you have a good time?
I had a great time. I had a great time. I was hoping you were going to ask me to come back after the inauguration.
Absolutely.
Don't tempt us with a good time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
we'll come down to your office.
Yeah, because then you can be a little more off the cuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can do one on location in the mayor's office.
There we go.
Man, we got it at the Horizon.
The Horizon, there you go.
Let's do it.
Election night party at the
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, the next part of that question is, who would you recommend to come on this.podcast?
Have you had Makisha Booth on yet?
We have not.
Oh, you should have Makisha Booth on. She launched Sister Biz. You know about Sister Biz?
Yep.
Okay, yeah,
absolutely.
She's a kind of, I just think, amazing entrepreneur, community leader who has a real vision for economic development and growth in the community. She'd be on the top of us. I assume you had Linda Lee already. You probably should get her on if you haven't had her yet.
Dude, we
Not
did.
yet.
We did.
Linda.
At the block party. We had Linda on at the block
Danielle,
party.
We did.
Danielle
Yes.
Shoots.
We had the segment.
It was quick.
But we didn't have a full
We had
episode.
a quick
did.
quick segment.
We did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Danielle Shoots. Have you had Danielle on? Do you know Danielle?
I do not.
She started one of the first kind of black-led venture capital funds in the city. Very impressive, thought leader on how to find and raise financing to grow business of color. Yeah, she's quite amazing. They'd be on the top of my list.
All right. Well, thanks. We're coming after you. All right. And let's give a round of applause for Mike for stopping by.
Yes.
We appreciate it, man. We had fun. And you never stumble upon the unexpected if you stick to the familiar. So go out there and be for the people.
Yes.
Do it.
This podcast.